You are listening to the Billy Dees Podcast.
All right. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to the program. As always, I am absolutely thrilled that you are here. If you've never checked us out before, we are primarily an interview and a commentary-based podcast. Today, I have an interview for you, on the line, on the studio line, is Dr. Albert Bramante. Albert, should I address you as Albert? Is that how you like to be addressed?
Sure. Yeah, Albert is fine. And thank you so much for Billy for having me on the show.
Oh, absolutely. Well, it's great to have you. This is interesting. You have a book called Rise Above the Script.
Yes, I do.
All right. And Dr. Bramante is a true triple threat when it comes to empowering performers to overcome psychological roadblocks and achieve success. As a veteran talent agent with over 20 years of securing major roles for actors, he has unparalleled insights into the entertainment industry's challenges. And I'm going to have some questions for him about that. However, Bramante's real superpower is his unique fusion of this experience with a PhD in psychology and certifications in hypnosis and NLP. So I'll start there. What is that? What is NLP?
So, great. Yeah, I'm glad you asked. NLP stands for Neuro-Linguistic Programming.
Okay.
And it is really about the study of human excellence, about how can we model human excellence, taking the people, and really improving them, to enhance their, not only just their, mental well-being, but their, everything about their lives. What can we do for that?
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
And so that's where really that begins. It's like the study of well-being, of human performance.
Okay.
And using both the brain, which is the neuro side, and and also language, and how we can learn to rewire the brain or reprogram the brain.
Right.
And that's where the programming comes in, because it's almost like using our brain is like a metaphor of a computer. We can program it.
Right.
We're not just at 25, 30 set for life.
Right.
The advances in neuroplasticity, how the brain can rewire itself at really any age. So really anybody can change and become, a better version if you practice and, use different techniques.
Sure. That's interesting. How did you get interested in this? Because it seems like, a lot of people go into psychology because they want to help, with mental health. This is a little different. Helping performers. How did this niche come about for you?
I started down the traditional route. I mean, that's how when I was a teenager, I wanted to help people. I wanted to, be a therapist. And, I was an avid reader growing up. So I one of my favorite books in high school was Dale Carnegie's famous How to Win Friends and Influence People. I also read Feeling Good by David Burns, which is a primer on cognitive behavioral therapy. Not typically what a high school student would be reading, but right. It was something that really just interested me. So I read a number of other books in psychology, and I was just really interested in the human mind. Plus, I was just always a fascinated kid. I always asked deep, complex questions. So this was like a natural transition for me. And then also when I was in high school, I was involved in the drama club. Okay. So, and when I was in college, I took some acting classes as electives, which like Intro to Theater, Acting 1, Acting 2. And at that time, it was just more of a passion idea for me. It really wasn't something I thought about. I was so intended on being a psychology major and becoming a clinical psychologist and earning a PhD in research and teaching and all that. And also in my family, teaching is in my blood. My mother is a retired, school teacher, and my father and brother, oldest brother, are retired like football coaches. So I think the coaching and teaching aspect melded in me, and so that became a natural progression for me. Natural, transition. So when I started going to grad school, I looked into marriage and family therapy, and I started looking at some of the work of Milton Erickson and Jay Haley and Chloe Madonis. And these were psychologists, but they looked at things in a different light. They were more about brief, strategic, solution-focused approaches.
Mm-hmm.
No nonsense and nothing unlike anything I was learning. And I was just so immensely interested in that. So, but I really didn't think too much of that. And then, I received my master's degree, and slowly I was intending to go for a PhD right away. I didn't get in to my intended targets of schools,
mm-hmm.
at least right away. That was not my plan. Well, my plan was to do that, but unfortunately life has other, things in store.
Yeah, little detours.
Yeah, little detours. So unfortunately, one of those detours in my life was 9/11. That was the same year I graduated with my master's degree. And so some of my contacts were like, we need volunteers to help in New York City, and being that I'm very close to New York, I said, sure, I'll help. I was looking for a job, and it was something good contacts. Some of those contacts were actors and filmmakers, and I really enjoyed that. And it kind of brought back my creative days. So it really just brought on my things there for a second.
Mm-hmm.
So that's sort of like something that really brought to mind there. So that brought back my interest there. Now, so I started acting a little bit too while I was working, and I was teaching now part-time. I realized acting wasn't for me, directly being in front of a camera.
Mm-hmm.
I enjoyed behind the scenes. I enjoyed working with actors. I enjoyed being in the crowd of actors, being in the environment of creatives and filmmakers. And so that was pretty much something that I really found, exciting.
Yeah. And
so that's what I did. I said, I'm going to become an agent. I'm going to represent actors. At this time, as I was starting my company, I said to myself, I want to go. I didn't want to abandon the PhD goal.
Mm-hmm.
That was always my goal since I was a child. I always wanted to be a doctor. Have doctor before my name. And so that's what I did. I said, I'm going to go back for my PhD. Now, as one thing that kept running up, and this is how I got into the transition of helping performers. When I first started my agency, and I still see it now, but the one thing that really shocked me to my core was how many actors were self-sabotaging.
Mm.
And we're running into that self-doubt. And that's where I said, this is something that's baffling to me, baffling to a lot of people in my field, in the industry I'm in. Why is this happening?
Mm-hmm.
So when it came down for my dissertation, I said, for my PhD, the advice I received was to always pick a topic or pick a real world problem that, I can solve, or at least get in the road of solving. So what's up with these actors? So I pitched the idea to my department, and they loved it at where I was going to school, Walden University. They loved it.
Mm-hmm.
So that became my dissertation. And so I spent a couple of years doing that, putting that together. And that I felt like the dissertation was the beginning of something great, because I can then combine both of my worlds,
mm-hmm.
Psychology with performance.
Yeah.
So that's how I got into, the performance side of things. And why I became interested in hypnosis and NLP was I don't want to say disillusioned, but I was like not too happy with clinical psychology. That's where I was getting my PhD in initially, was clinical psychology. It was on my route to do that. But I found a couple of things that I disagreed with. Now, again, clinical psychology started to do amazing work. It's an amazing field.
Sure.
I have immense respect. But for me, what wasn't working was the long-term therapy, pathologizing people, labeling people, putting people, in these, boxes and really almost, their identity became their illness became their identity, I should say. So, and that's something that didn't really sit well with me.
Yeah.
So I said, you know what, I'm going to back away from this. So I actually saw it in Psychology Today. There was a video course at the time, Learn Hypnosis. I said, well, I was curious about this. So I took a couple of classes, then I discovered NLP, and then that brought me back to Erickson, Haley, and Adonis back in grad school. Although at the time in grad school, it was known as solution-focused therapy, not really NLP.
Mm-hmm.
But the NLP discipline was kind of born out of the work of those people. So I said, this is great because it's definitely using, psychology, but in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
So, I would say, NLP is more geared towards people with, individuals with more, I don't want to say clinical issue, presentations,
mm-hmm.
but more like that, deal with self-doubt or procrastination, self-doubt or imposter syndrome or need some boost in their self-esteem. And that's like, this is more of the people I want to be working with, not necessarily the clinical, those that are clinically mentally ill.
Mm-hmm.
Again, those services are great. It just wasn't for me.
Sure. Absolutely.
So that's how I became really in this path.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then, I turned my dissertation, that Rise Above the Script is really based on my work on my dissertation.
Okay. Fair enough. Mastering the actor's mindset. There's a self-doubt component to acting. Now, I did very little acting. I did do stand-up comedy for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And I was around some, headliners. I was never a headliner. I was one of the ones that went out before. But, one of the things that they told me, which was very interesting, is that it's good to have a little nervousness because it keeps you sharp. And it keeps you, the audience, if they sense it at all, will know that you respect them. But if you walk out there like you own the place, they'll hate you for it. But you got to balance it. You can't be so scared that you freeze. Yeah.
No, I think that's so important. And that's the one thing that if you look at the physical symptoms of nervous stage, right? Elevated heart rate, sometimes the, sweaty palms, the warming of body temperature, the sweating. That can also be excitement,
mm-hmm.
adrenaline.
Yeah.
So it's all about how you look at it. So maybe what I think we should be doing is looking at, it as excitement rather than nerves. So, and that's where I also think if an actor's not feeling anything, I think there's something wrong.
Mm-hmm.
If you're not feeling any type of tension when you go out and perform, something's not there because something is missing. So, but I think if you say it's excitement, it's not going to paralyze you.
Mm-hmm. And
actually, that a bit of adrenaline can actually really enhance your performance in anything you do.
Yes.
Whether you're, doing stand-up comedy, whether you're giving a presentation or sales, leading a sales meeting or making a sale, that little bit of adrenaline can sometimes be a good push, a good, elevate you to really put you out there.
Yes. Excellent point. I ran across a post of yours online and you were talking about how positivity can be a thing that's not necessarily positive because it can pressure you into being something that maybe isn't the best way to focus on what you're doing. And let me tell you something. I'm glad that people are finally starting to say this because I've been saying this for years. I think positivity, and there's nothing wrong with positivity because I always get hit with, well, what do you do? Like negativity? That's the straw man argument
mm-hmm.
that always comes back at me. Well, you like negativity. No, it's not what I'm saying. Just like faith. I don't think faith is necessarily a bad thing. But faith can be bottled and sold, and I think this is happening now with positivity. There's all this stuff, all these courses, all this and that. Stay positive, positive, positive. You got to put. Somebody was saying the other day how you got to put little notes all around the house to remind yourself. I think at that point you're altering your reality, and it sidesteps discipline. Discipline is what matters. When you know you're going to go into something difficult, you focus and do it the right way, not pretend that it's fun. Now, am I interpreting what you were saying correctly, or would you like to expound on that?
Well, no, that's definitely a good point. And it for me, my whole thing with toxic positivity, I'm much, I definitely believe in being happy and being, showing gratitude. Sure. But at the same time, I don't think we should be negating people's experiences or events. I mean, there's a time when it's okay to be angry. There's a time when it's okay to be upset and sad. And, when we start to say, don't worry, be happy. I mean, that was a song in the 80s I grew up to, don't worry, be happy. Great song, not a good concept. Yeah. Because it's telling people your concerns don't matter. Just, smile. Mm-hmm. And that to me is almost a form of like gaslighting or bypassing somebody's experiences. Now, yet I also at the same token wouldn't say negativity is the way to go either.
Sure.
I think that can be just as, if not worse than, positivity. But at the same time, just being realistic, like, okay. Just like, like even when we're praising like kids, for instance, I teach child psychology and I was talking about, praise is great when it's used in the right way, not just telling somebody they're great without some sort of constructive feedback. And that will backfire on, and we've seen this, in the 80s and 90s, we tried the self-esteem, like everyone's a winner and we get these, everyone gets a trophy and you're great. And the problem is it backfired. And now you have people that are expecting rewards for doing basic work, that would normally be required of them.
Yes. That's my point exactly. I'm so glad that you mentioned that. I'm glad I ran across that online when you wrote that, because I thought I got to ask him about this. Now, you have an interesting / agent and psychologist. Agent / psychologist. That is probably something you don't hear every day. I mean, a lot of people might say, my agent is my friend, or my agent is, whatever, my best cheerleader, whatever, but you don't too often have an agent psychologist combination. I would think that that's something that, is that something people come to you for, or do you present that when people come to you?
Not necessarily. I mean, I keep it separate. I'm a firm believer in boundaries, number one. Most, I would say 95% of the actors I work with, I'm agent only. And that's perfect. That's the way it is. And the way it should be. I'm not going to sit here and sit there and say, okay, by the way, if you want, I can psychoanalyze you. Tell me about your. No, I wouldn't go that way. Yeah. But because most of them wouldn't be. But there are some that I might, if they're having a bad day or a bad week or a bad experience, they can sometimes, go through things, and I can be there and be empathic for them. Yeah. So, and again, I never intended to be an agent. As a matter of fact, I never really intended, at least when I was in my early 20s, intended to work in show business at all. Right. I was so intended on being, a research psychologist, a college professor, and a, psychologist having my own practice. That was like my goal for up until I was 20, 24, 25. So I didn't have any intentions of being an agent. That just happened kind of by happy accident. Right. So, but it was definitely where I needed to be. And so that's something that, combination. Yeah, I didn't plan that. I didn't plan this, I should say.
One of the things you talk about is creating overcoming, I should say, the creative self-sabotage that is in some creative folks. Now, I've had a lot of problems. That's one I haven't had, but I know it's very common. When people, is it because they're afraid that they might actually achieve something, or what happens there?
Well, self-sabotage really is a protective mechanism, and it's a subconscious protective mechanism. So our brain, a magnificent brain, is designed to protect us and keep us alive, and it does a fantastic job of doing those basic functions, protecting us, keeping us alive. Thousands of years ago, when we were in hunter-gathering days, there were so many things that were thrown at us that were life-threatening. We had wild animals, we had other tribes, we had, the weather, the climate, illnesses, bacteria. So there were so many different threats. And so we had to be vigilant. We had to always be on the lookout. And our brain evolved through that. Yeah. And so that truly, really helped us go through that in a sense.
Right. That's I'm guessing that there's a lot of things left over, a lot of the tribalisms, and I'm going to say we have a tendency to go with people that we're familiar with. Familiarity is a concept that I'm aware of. It's why we feel more comfortable in a car than we do a plane, even though every statistic in the world will tell you you're safer in the plane. But it's not It's not a familiar place for both of us.
No, it's totally not a familiar place.
Yes. So I totally get that. Imposter syndrome, that's something that a lot of people struggle with. And that's one of the things I think that the creative arts can do. Like when I did comedy, a lot of the people in our work groups weren't people who necessarily wanted to be comedians, but they wanted to become better speakers when they were giving presentations. They want to know about timing, how to elevate your energy at the right time, etc. So as a performer, understanding imposter syndrome is something that's very important. But I would imagine a lot of people who have to speak or do anything are struggling with it. Clinically, you can explain it a lot better than I can. What is imposter syndrome, and how do you overcome it?
Well, it's definitely related to self-sabotage, and it's part of one of the reasons why we do that. But it's really just like the textbook definition of feeling like a fraud. So maybe, especially for actors or creative people, because there's a lot of competition. So it's difficulty getting jobs and getting steady employment. And so now, let's say you've been doing this, you've been trying out for gig after gig after gig, and not getting anywhere. And so all of a sudden you start to doubt yourself, am I really meant to do this? And then you have your family and friends pressuring you, saying, why haven't I seen you in movies? Why haven't I seen you performing? And so that's going to add up over time. And then after 6 months to a year or even 2 years, it's like, what am I doing? Why am I here? And then now what's going to happen is when you start getting, doing auditions, that self-doubt is going to creep in your head, and it's going to be scary now. And so going back to the idea of self-sabotage, I always say self-sabotage is a protective mechanism. It's protecting you from that fear. And that, imposter syndrome can bring up that fear. Well, I'm always, one of the things, the myths that has been romanticized with artists is the starving artist myth, the starving artist archetype. I need to struggle. I need to starve for my art. I need to, money, I shouldn't do it for money. Money is, evil. And then what happens here is then our brain hears this and says, okay, any possible opportunities for, we don't want to be evil. We don't want to be, we don't want to be uncomfortable. So I'll just simply avoid it. And what happens here consciously, we don't realize this is going on, because with self-sabotage, it's not like you don't wake up and say, hey, I'm self-sabotaging today. Most people, unless somebody points it out to you, don't even realize that they're doing, engaging in these patterns. And what it looks like for actors would be, not showing up for auditions, being late, being unprepared, partying the night before instead of preparing. Yeah. Leaving late from the house and not accounting for traffic. Any little thing that can actually could have been easily preventable you'll start not doing. And that's what self-sabotage looks like.
Mm-hmm.
And you're going through emotions, but, you're just not, doing that. And that's what was happening with the actors I was working with, years ago, where they were telling me how much they wanted to work and how they were so sad there was not enough work available. And every time I had something for them, there was an excuse.
Yeah.
They were too tired or they wouldn't feel good or it wasn't a good opportunity for them. I didn't like the script. Things like that. I'm like, no, there's something else going on here.
Mm-hmm.
What they're telling me and what's actually going on are two different things.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. What happens when the pendulum swings the other way? What happens when you have a prima donna? When you have somebody who thinks they can do no wrong and they're really not that great?
Yeah. Well, that, and I actually have a chapter in my book. This is what I call toxic high self-esteem.
Mm-hmm.
Because what happens here, and really it's an oxymoron in a sense, because they're coming across as being very high self-esteem, but it's a very fragile self-esteem that can be easily broken with a little breeze almost. And one of the things we see with these people that are arrogant, that any little bit of a challenge to their belief system, I don't really want to say delusion, but we can say that. But, any little challenge to that will cause a break or an injury, a psychological injury, where they'll go off the deep end. Mm-hmm. Most actors that I work with are very open to feedback. Direction when you tell them like, okay, the scene needs to be done better, or, I don't like this approach. But there are some that will get really incredibly insulted. Like almost like, how dare you say that to me?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, this is interesting because we have to talk about this. Why are you getting so defensive, if you think you're good,
mm-hmm.
and you should be open to that. Like, okay, I may not personally agree with the feedback, but these people know what they're doing. They know what they're giving me the good advice. Let me adopt it. I may not agree with it, but I'm going to I'm going to become a better actor. A lot of people with this toxic self-esteem don't do that. And so that's why I made I backed this up in my dissertation, that toxic self-esteem, high self-esteem is a link. There's a high link between that and self-sabotage.
Okay. Interesting. That's an interesting parallel. I never thought about that. We've been talking to Dr. Albert Bramante. The book is called, I just want to tell you one more time, Rise Above the Script. In your book, you introduce some techniques for raising self-esteem. Can you share a couple of those techniques just to give people some idea of what you talk about and maybe a success story that you've had?
Sure. Well, the one thing that I will say, two things come to mind. One is the company you keep. It's very important that you surround yourself with other people that are also positive-minded, that are also hardworking. Because if you hang around with people that are negative, that are, out of work actors, that are bitter, well, I'm going to tell you right now, that's going to be you very soon. Because we are the company we keep.
Yeah.
So proximity is power, and I kind of borrow that off of Tony Robbins and the people he's trained with. So I think that's very, very important to understand. With that, come to mind is the idea of watch the company you keep. The second thing to do, and this is going to be, is to face your fears. And what I mean by doing that is do something every day that's a little uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
That's a way to raise your self-esteem. One thing, one of my trainers in NLP used to run 2-day workshops on mastering public speaking. He said the real big lesson wasn't what was the first hour. You walked in, you sat at the table, desks, and he said, okay, everyone get up, and you're going to go out in public, and you're going to do something really outrageous and make a fool out of yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever it is has to be over the top, outlandish.
Interesting.
In public.
Yeah.
And scary as can be.
Yeah.
But the people that did that, like the people that really took advantage of that, by the time they get back, just that alone, without any public speaking training, made them much better public speakers. Because it made, it got them that inhibitions out.
Mm-hmm.
Another one of my trainers said another good activity to do is karaoke.
Oh, okay.
When you're sober, too, that, because again, it's all about overcoming your fears.
Yeah.
Because what's interesting is, it's interesting because a lot of people are scared of karaoke. Mm-hmm. Even people that are really good singers don't like it because it is a public spectacle. But I think it's so great. And I'll tell a story for myself. I used to host prior to COVID in New York City. I used to do for my agency, a couple times a year. We would just do a night. We'd go to a karaoke bar and have fun.
Yeah.
And it was a good way to let off steam, bonding. And one time for me, I remember I was, in New York City, I was looking for something to do and I saw a karaoke meetup. Now, I don't sing. I have no artistic ability. So I said, you know what? I'm going to go just to watch.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't read the fine print because in order to go to the event, you had to sing 2 songs.
Oh.
So I'm in the event. I'm in this room of 20 strangers. People I don't even know. They pass the mic to me. And they say, okay, tell me your song you're about to sing. And I was like, okay, let me go. And I just did it. And I was sober. And room full of strangers, people I never knew.
Yeah.
And I sang 2 songs.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what the outcome was. And I tortured them, but I walked out of there feeling elated, euphoric. And I'm like, this is powerful.
Yes.
So doing something uncomfortable, and I'm not saying everyone should be rushing to the karaoke bar, but I'm saying do something that's uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
Because that'll show you can do it.
Yeah.
And that'll tell you that you're capable of that. And that's the way that the needle's going to move.
Yeah.
And another thing I would say is take action on the projects that you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Make a list of everything you want to accomplish, and, pick a few of those and then start breaking down what do you need to do.
Mm-hmm.
And instead of saying someday I'm going to do this, start today. Start today with one thing. Knock one thing off that list that you need to do. And just keep doing that every day. Because if you do one action a day, that'll be 365 at a time that'll be next year.
Mm-hmm.
You'll be leaps ahead of most people.
Okay.
If you do that.
Interesting. Okay. Again, I'm going to say the author's name, Dr. Albert Bramante, Rise Above the Script. I always have to ask a couple curveballs. I can't let you off the hook.
Okay.
AI. It's one thing for an actor to have self-doubt going up against another actor. How is AI impacting the mental health, I guess, the self-esteem of people in the performance arts?
Well, definitely, I think the important thing is a lot of times people are going into the performing arts for validation.
Yeah.
Which is fine, and that's the reality of it.
Yeah.
But I think the important thing is to already somewhat have that to some level, because the actors that are successful are not the ones that are doing it for validation, at least intentionally.
Yeah.
Because when you walk in expecting approval, the quality of the work is going to decline, be mediocre at best, because what's going to happen is you're going to be in your head when you're performing.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to be worrying about, okay, are they going to like me? What are they thinking? What's going on here? Did I do the right thing? What's my mark? All of this stuff is going to add in there.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
So
the other thing that I would ask about AI is this. For example, I am not one of those people that's afraid that AI is going to take over the world like some science fiction movie. I don't believe that's going to happen. Mm-hmm. But I think the harm that it can do has already started. You have a lot of people now that are asking AI for advice about their personal relationships, about their career path, and so on. And you got a lot of young actors coming up now thinking that, this is a good way to get some information quick. Yes. Is there a danger of the humanity coming out of the arts? Because I think that's what makes it good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, AI is not creative. That's the one thing that it cannot do.
Okay.
It can automate things if you were like to do basic stuff and, maybe send out, an email or, copy for something, but it's not creative.
Okay.
And that's why if you look at a lot of the stuff that's on Facebook and Instagram and these, AI, they're so flat and boring. It's like, okay. And I don't think that's going to change anytime soon.
Right.
Make it better visuals, but you still need the human element behind it to prompt it. And I am concerned about the chat, people turning to chatbots for advice and because it only goes by what, it only looks at information. It's a predictive mechanism. It's not, doesn't have sentience yet.
Yes.
So all it's going to do is give you generic advice and it's, picked up on like YouTube videos or things like that and give it back to you. And it does sound incredibly human. They have programmed the chatbots now to be very,
oh yeah,
it almost, it feels like you're talking to a person.
Sure.
But you're not. And that's the whole thing too. And I think that, and that's just in general, it's like, okay, this is why we really need social connection because, again, I'm not concerned about people using AI daily, for other stuff. But I am concerned when people start using it as a therapist, as a, for a companionship. That worries me.
Yeah.
In the long run, because it's not, it's not designed for that. And even matter of fact, the engineers who designed, said it's not supposed to be for that.
Yes.
So, and I think that's my concern, that it shouldn't be a replacement. Now, fundamentally, what we have to figure out is why are people who need it aren't getting it elsewhere?
Yeah.
Why are they not getting that companionship?
Yes. That's it. That's a good question. And, I think there's a lot of people who are lost now. I don't know why. That's a whole nother discussion, whether it be social media or the landscape of our society.
I think it's a combination of both.
Yeah.
I really do.
Yeah. Yes. Well, here again, the name of the book is Rise Above the Script, and Dr. Albert Bramante is the author. Where can people find you, and where can they get the book?
Sure. Well, you can find me on LinkedIn.
Okay.
Under Albert Bramante. I post a lot of blogs there. You can also go to my website, albertbramante.com, and I would love to connect.
Awesome. Where can people get the book?
You can get it on Amazon. It's Rise Above the Script, Confronting Self-Doubt and Mastering Self-Sabotage for Performing Artists. You can also get it as an audiobook or an ebook as well.
That is absolutely fantastic. Interesting conversation. Like I said, that combination of an agent and as a psychologist, that's very, very interesting. That's a unique combination.
Thank you.
Oh, sure. My name is Billy Dees, and you can find me just about anywhere when it comes to social media. Probably my social media home is still X, which is the former Twitter. I happen to believe for trending topics, breaking news, that type of thing, that instant information, X is a good place. You can also find me on Substack now. Real easy to find at Billy Dees. And, of course, you can find the Billy Dees Podcast anywhere you find podcasts. We have over a 10-year history now, and you can find us on your favorite platform. Thank you so much for listening, and we will talk to you again very, very soon. I'm Billy Dees and host of the self-titled podcast, The Billy Dees Podcast. We are primarily an interview and a commentary-based podcast featuring authors and creators talking about their craft, advocates for community issues, and myself and an array of co-hosts discussing current events. There's no partisan ranting and raving going on here, just great content. You can find the Billy Dees Podcast on your favorite platform and on Twitter at Billy Dees. Thank you, and I hope you listen in.